If you listen to Republican senators or quite a few Israelis, they would say it's America's complete capitulation in the face of Iran's resilience.
The problem for Donald Trump is he's got to sell a deal that is better in his eyes than Barack Obama's deal. The money is a problem for him, and it's going down very, very badly already here. This is a new low, isn't it, for US-Israel relations?
I really think this is. I think the relationship, the personal relationship between those two, which has been tricky in the past, may have been permanently ruptured.
Hello and welcome to Trump World. I'm Anushka Astana in Washington, D.C.
And I'm Matt Fry in London, currently in almost the same time zone as Donald Trump, because, of course, he's at the G7 summit in the wonderful spa town of Evian, named after the mineral water, or rather the mineral water is named after it. The joke is that it's twice as expensive as any other mineral water. So I wonder if Trump likes that. You know, he likes the fact that it's such a big deal. But it's been quite a week, hasn't it? One hell of a week, in fact.
It has been one hell of a week. I mean, you couldn't make some of it up. Since we last spoke, they took his name down from the Kennedy Center, much to the glee of anti-Trump crowds who had gathered. And then, of course, we had his 80th birthday. What would you do on your 80th birthday? Erect a giant, grotesque UFC stadium and watch sweaty men wrestling. Is it wrestling or is it fighting? Anyway, it's not for me.
And of course, he's got the power to do it. He was really channeling kind of ancient Rome, wasn't he? He signed a deal with Persia, and at the same time, he organized a gladiatorial ring in front of his palace. I mean, what could be more old school than that?
What could be more old school than that? Exactly. A quick call to the New York Times in the middle of the fight to tell them that the Iran deal had been signed, and then he was on his plane, flew across to Europe, to France, of course, as you were saying, and declared, I'm the boss.
Well, hello. I'm the boss.
He had dinner in the gilded Palace of Versailles.
It's very Mar-a-Lago, that. It reminds him of Mar-a-Lago.
Let's talk about the deal, because it's not exactly the Treaty of Versailles, is it? The leak we have is 14 points, and already lots of controversy about the money.
Well, hang on a second. You would say it's not the Treaty of Versailles. If you listen to Republican senators or quite a few Israelis, they would say it's America's complete capitulation in the face of Iran's resilience. And then listen to hardliners in Tehran, they would tell you that it's complete capitulation for what they have continued to do, especially to the Strait of Hormuz. We'll get to the reaction later, but basically, there's a lot of stuff in there. I've got in front of me, this is the leaked document of the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding. And to be clear, this is not a peace treaty as such. It's just the beginning of something that might then blossom into a peace treaty during the 60-day ceasefire period. It has 14 points. And it says, here's one which I particularly like. The Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States undertake to respect each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity and to refrain from interfering in each other's internal affairs, which is kind of funny when you consider that this whole thing was started in order to bring about regime change. So they won't be meddling with each other. Then there's this interesting thing about money, and this is a bit confusing. Essentially, the US, although not taxpayer money, would invite people, Americans, Gulf Arabs, whoever, it didn't specify, to invest in a $300 billion US dollar fund to help the reconstruction of Iran. As Lindsey Graham, the otherwise very loyal Trump-supporting senator from South Carolina, said, this is like giving the Nazis the Marshall Plan while they're still in power. Trump then denied and said, well, actually, I wasn't going to give them $300 billion, not a single. In fact, I wasn't going to give them 10 cents. But if you read the actual text, I'm going to just read this out. It's confusing. This is point 6 of the memorandum. The United States undertakes, together with its regional partners, to create a comprehensive plan agreed upon by both parties for the rehabilitation and economic development of the Islamic Republic of Iran, while ensuring financing of at least $300 billion US dollars. Ensuring financing. What does that mean? The implementation mechanism of this plan, as part of its final agreement, will be formulated within 60 days. So I guess what they're trying to say there, it's an incentive scheme. If you undertake some of the other points here, which is like, diluting your enriched uranium, giving the IAEA access to verify that, etc., then we will give you some of that money. But how that money will be raised, How many Gulf states do you think, Anushka, are willing to give money to the country that has just bombed their facilities? I wonder.
I mean, this is the issue, isn't it? Those countries, and I speak to a lot of their diplomats here in the US, countries, like Saudi Arabia, like Qatar, and so on, have faced massive damage and are already reeling by the economic fix that they've got to go through. So the idea that they're suddenly going to fund this absolutely massive fund without any help from the US seems slightly for the birds. But the problem for Donald Trump is he's got to sell a deal that is better in his eyes than Barack Obama's deal back in 2015. And the big thing he criticised that deal for doing was sending, in his words, pallets of cash over to Iran. So the money is a problem for him, and it's going down very, very badly already here. The idea that America is not going to even give 10 cents, though, seems entirely unrealistic. The other thing is, my comparison with the Treaty of Versailles was not so much about, the content, but the length. That was 428 pages long, 5 centimetres thick. This is a side of A4. The last Iran deal was also huge and took years to negotiate. So, for example, in here, they talk about nuclear, but basically say we're going to deal with that next, including, really key thing, getting the nuclear material outside of Iran. Donald Trump's basically said, a mountain's collapsed on it. Is there even any point in getting it? And Matt, one bit I wanted to ask you about was actually point 1 in the memorandum, which says the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States, together with their allies in the current war, so that includes Hezbollah, presumably in Lebanon, and Israel, declare upon the signing of this memorandum of understanding an immediate and permanent end to the war on all fronts, including Lebanon. But we also know that Benjamin Netanyahu was saying, I haven't even seen the deal just days ago. This is a new low, isn't it, for US-Israel relations? I
really think this is. I think the personal relationship between those two, which has been tricky in the past. It's not always been, all singing or dancing. I think may have been permanently ruptured here, which may not matter after October if Netanyahu loses the election, but it may matter if he doesn't. And it's so fascinating because, so here we have Hezbollah, menacing to Israel in Lebanon, menacing to the Lebanese government. But Hezbollah is probably more controlled by their bosses in Tehran, even those cowering in a bunker, than Israel can be controlled by the United States. And that's partly because Netanyahu faces his own very perilous political dialectic. If he listens to what Trump is asking him to do, which is to basically ignore, Israel's very real enemy to the north in southern Lebanon, Hezbollah, then, he is in danger of copying it from the left and the right in Israeli politics and could well lose the election. Plus the fact that many Israelis are deeply upset that the war with Iran, which is supposed to be all about regime change and the final viable, visible annihilation of their nuclear program, is very much unfinished business. So will he be tempted to go back and pick another fight with Hezbollah? Will Hezbollah provoke him in order to drive a greater wedge between the US and Israel? These are all very open questions, and it'll be very hard for Netanyahu, who's really been able to have it both ways in recent years, of both controlling the United States, even before that with President Biden. Biden never really stood up to him when he took his war to the people of Gaza excessively, in the interest of stuffing out Hamas. He could basically got away with what many people are still calling genocide. And at the same time, of course, he had this bromance with Trump, which led them to declare war on February the 28th against Iran. So I can see where Netanyahu is in a really tricky position. But I think what's changed as well is the domestic environment in the United States. Now, Rahm Emanuel, the former mayor of Chicago, Obama chief of staff, former ambassador to Japan, came out the other day in a podcast and said, I would not guarantee Israel the kind of defense funding and the subsidies it's been getting from the United States. For a Jewish American politician like him to say that is extraordinary. And it shows you that the domestic political needle has shifted against Israel, not just amongst MAGA Republicans like Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson, but also amongst many Jewish Democrats who are always staunch supporters of Israel. And I think that is a reality that Trump is taking into account as he ramps up his rhetorical war against Netanyahu. And Netanyahu must be painfully aware that he's falling between a whole number of political stools, both at home and in the US. So as you can see, Anushka, I mean, lots of divisions inside Israel, mainly to the detriment of Netanyahu. Divisions inside America, we can talk about those a little bit later too, to the detriment of Donald Trump. But also, let's not forget, divisions inside Tehran between hardliners and not so hardliners. And as you just found out, in the Iranian exile community, who are so divided, aren't they?
Yeah, I've just spent the last few days in LA, where there are over 150,000 Iranians, the biggest population outside of Iran. One part of the city is sort of fondly known as Tehrangeles, and there's loads of kind of Iranian businesses. And look, it is really worth stressing that this is people coming from a certain point of view. It's largely people who have fled Iran. I met people who had left after being arrested multiple times. One person was saying because of the T-shirt that they were wearing. Some of those people very closely associated with the former Shah. They actually left in 1979. I met a woman whose father was the deputy head of the Air Force under the Shah, sent her out of the country, and then they actually found out on the radio that her dad had been executed by the Islamic Republic. So it's a point of view, right? These are people who feel very strongly anti-regime. Everything we read and think suggests that a strong majority within Iran are also against the regime, but very, very passionate voices, lots of them pro-monarchist, although I kept saying to them, well, there were, claims of repression under the Shah, and they were all saying, no, we just believe in the Shah's son, Reza Pahlavi, as a kind of agent of change towards democracy. And then others who were kind of more left-wing, pro-democracy, who were kind of more anti the Islamic regime, but also very much anti Donald Trump's war. So as you say, those divisions. But one thing that was kind of universal was anger about this deal. And I think point 2 will be particularly upsetting to a lot of those people. The Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States, you mentioned this before, undertake to respect each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and to refrain from interfering in each other's internal affairs. And the reason people were upset, Matt, was because I met people who were really quite pro-military action. And you might argue it's easier to say that from LA than if you're actually living under the bombs in Tehran. I met people who were unsure about the war, but all of them were hopeful that there was going to be regime change. They were hopeful that that's what Donald Trump wanted. And I think that note, that number 2, says not only is that not our aim, we're not going there anymore at all. There were still some people who were hopeful that a weakened regime will pave the way for, political pressure internally. But people genuinely, I was there with them when the news of the deal landed, genuinely devastated by all of that. I mean, obviously, there will be those divisions within Iran as well, but a different take on it. We were 8,000 miles away from Tehran in LA.
It's so interesting. Those divisions amongst the Iranian camps. So years ago, I might have told you this, I met Reza Pahlavi because he was a dad at one of my daughter's schools in Washington. And I went to interview him then for the BBC, and we spent some time in his extraordinary sort of McMansion outside Washington in Maryland. And the east wing of this mansion was a broadcasting studio that he used to appeal to, opposition exiled Iranians living all over the United States. But the impression I got, and in fact, one of his courtiers admitted this, was that he was essentially broadcasting into nothing. That the viewership of his particular channel, of the listenership of his radio station was minute because he was competing against 20 other stations. And this is some time ago, it's about 14 years ago or so. But the State Department had no interest in him whatsoever. And you would have thought, after such a long-running dispute between the United States and Iran, that the Americans would do anything they could to kind of tease out someone who was a viable opposition figure and build them up and give them some funding. This is after they'd done the same in Iraq with Saddam Hussein's opponents, who were on much flimsier ground than Reza Pahlavi. And so I was so surprised that he was so irrelevant. And then even this year, so his name was mentioned in January on the streets of Tehran. People in Washington started talking about him. But Trump, interestingly enough, didn't go there very far. Marco Rubio didn't really talk about him a lot. Even the pro regime change hawks in the around the administration weren't talking about Reza much. And when you mention him on air, Channel 4 News or elsewhere, other figures in the Iranian exile community went nuts. How could you give this guy any airtime? The reason was that he was too pro-Israel. The Israelis were too into him. I mean, I don't know. To be honest, it's utterly befuddling. It's a sort of Byzantine forest of opposition. And I suspect some of it is down to the fact that many of those people that you might have met in Tehran, in Tehrangelis in LA, were actually making quite a bit of money out of the regime in Tehran. There's some very good mullahs who are very adept at business. So there's a lot of stuff under the surface that's rather ambiguous and shady that we don't really know about very much because it doesn't fit into our narrative. But that's one of the other forces that, that wants some degree of status quo in all this. And it seems to me so ironic that, the only people happy with this memorandum of understanding are essentially Donald Trump, oil tanker operators, possibly oil tanker insurers, the rump regime in Tehran. That's about it.
Well, European leaders, because it's probably a little bit of a relief for our economies.
European leaders, the bystanders, the ringside observers who saw their economies being shredded, but who had essentially no military skin in the game. Yeah, they're delighted too. But I'm not even sure whether the Arabs in the Gulf are delighted, because it doesn't fundamentally defang the threat that has been bombing their facilities and their airports and upending their model of a peaceful life in a low tax haven, for the foreseeable future. And of course, as we know, it could all go belly up in the next 60 days.
I think LA, the Iranian community there, the diaspora there, are known as one of the strongest pro-Pahlavi communities, I think, in the world. And as you say, as soon as you put out their voices, you get opposition from people who disagree with them. But what was interesting is everywhere we went, we saw the lion and sun flag, some of them with a crown on it, which I think indicates you're more monarchist, some of it without, which indicates you're more just pro-democracy. But that flag, which represents the pre-revolution, before the Shah was overthrown, the Iran from the past, has become a symbol of the opposition, and we saw it everywhere. Yes, among some people who were associated with the former Shah, but also among really young people, among people who have left Iran in recent years because they disliked the fact that it had become so religious, secular people. So many Jewish Iranians I met as well, many of whom were quite pro-Israel, who had left Iran. The population there has reduced, I think, from 100,000 Jews to something like 10,000. Many of those people have moved to LA. And that flag had become this real symbol of opposition. Now, I was there at this time because Iran were actually playing in the World Cup against New Zealand, a quite exciting game. They drew 2-2. What a spectacle, a country that has been at war with the home nation for so long, coming here, playing a game. And FIFA have banned the lion and sun flag, saying it's too political. There was actually a legal case challenging FIFA while I was there, which was lost. FIFA sent in their attorneys with a 400-page document to try and keep the ban. Anyway, I went outside the match mat and people were hiding those flags in everywhere they could think of in order to take them into the ground.
My support for the team has nothing to do with the support for the regime.
How did you get your flags in?
We snuck them in our pants.
And what happened when you took them out?
They didn't give us too much fuss. We had to hide them during the game, but it wasn't too bad.
There was a lot of division, a lot of people arguing, Iranians versus Iranians arguing, people bringing the Iranian flag going for New Zealand, which makes no sense.
Did you cheer the team in there?
No, I did not cheer the team. I cheered New Zealand. I didn't want them to win because they represent the government. They don't represent the people of Iran.
When they scored, I didn't know if I have to be happy or sad. So it was a very niche experience.
Basically, FIFA gave up. They allowed the flag to go in. It was flown fairly heftily inside the ground and very heftily outside the ground. But there was a disagreement, and I met a couple of people in official Iran shirts, and they were actually being booed and jeered by these anti-regime crowds. One of them was really, really upset because she was like, they want a king. I go on the No Kings marches, I don't want the Islamic Republic. I'm secular, but I also don't want a king here in the US. And someone else was saying, yeah, we've got religious fanatics here in the US as well. So real divisions.
But, I think a lot of it is down to the fact that the Iranian regime has been so successful at snuffing out any homegrown opposition or co-opting them somehow, that, there is no Nelson Mandela figure inside Iran. And as we said before, the exiled community is so divided that the only name they can sort of, or some people can sort of occasionally come up with any name recognition is the son of the former Shah. But I don't think that the majority of Iranians in exile want to return to the monarchy. I don't think they want that.
No, and that's not what no one I asked was basically calling for monarchy per se. They were calling for democracy.
But I also believe it. I don't think they're hiding their rhetorical flags, as it were. I think they're being quite genuine. But I think in the absence, but they're also, they hate the regime that's currently in place more than they dislike or disdain Reza. So if Reza is the only person with a degree of name recognition, some of them will say, fine, we'll deal with that. But I think the main point is that, we're back to where we were, last year. There's no hint of regime change at the moment. The regime has, if anything, clamped down. It's executed more people. Reza is irrelevant now as he was then. The key difference, I think, will be, and it'll be so fascinating to see this, if and when the money comes online to start reconstruction, and if and when the regime there feels it can loosen the reins a little bit, as they have done to some extent already by allowing people back onto the internet, once those people, with their memories of what happened back in January, with thousands, if not tens of thousands of them gunned down and others executed, a whole generation, of young, bright, hopeful Iranians squashed, trampled on. And that is a bitterness I hear over and over again from people outside Iran. And I'm sure it's doubly the case inside Iran. Once they feel they can breathe again, that's when the regime has to watch out, because those regimes tend to fall when people are given a little bit of space, not under the bombardment, not when the guns are on the streets, but when everyone relaxes a little bit. That's suddenly when you feel the real momentum for political change. So although at the moment regime change looks like a pipe dream that will never happen, just like it has been for all these decades, something has changed fundamentally. And I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the year, we're going to see a resurgence of these protests, but possibly even more powerful than the previous ones. I'm putting it out there as an idea.
I mean, I would say that among the people I met, that was the kind of most hopeful thing for them, which was, look, the regime hasn't gone, but the regime is weakened. One guy who was playing on an Iranian diaspora football team, but had been a professional player inside Iran and left in 2013, was saying to me, I don't want war. I grew up under the bombs of the Iran-Iraq war, lived near the border. I am still traumatized by what happened. But his feeling was something needs to give. And he was hopeful that this is a weakened regime and perhaps the opposition will bubble up more from inside. So he absolutely agreed with you, Matt. But that was the most hope that I heard. And I think largely people were upset about the deal. And while obviously Iranians in LA may well feel very differently to Iranians within Iran, what I did find really fascinating was these are not the sort of voices you ever hear from inside Iran because they're too scared to speak.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think maybe we'll hear more of them. One really interesting thing, I've spent the weekend with some Iranians who go back there quite a bit and have good contacts there. And they say the one thing that never comes across in any of our coverage of Iran is that actually, even though the regime can be utterly brutal, as we've seen again this year repeatedly, they've also loosened the reins. So you can go to fantastic, internet cafes when the internet is working. There's some incredible street music. There's some theater companies. I mean, there's a lot of metropolitan life from these people, of which millions have been to university and really the best educational system anywhere in the Middle East. And these are kind of young, designated adults who want to be taken seriously, who of course are terrified that they'll be gunned down at some stage or, hung by the neck. But at the same time, the fulcrum of civic culture, of some democracy is there and has not been snuffed out despite everything that's happened. And again, I just think, watch this blossoming. I mean, it may happen without any of us taking any notice because we've moved on to Cuba or Greenland or God knows where else Donald Trump will take us in the next few months. But I wouldn't be surprised if this stuff comes back.
Yeah, one thing that people were saying to me, which I hadn't really thought about before, but it's obviously so true, is that the terrible scenes that we saw in Iran in January, where young people went out despite the risk to them, despite the fact that people were being gunned down, has brought attention to the world, what was happening, what they say was happening for some time. And that can't be taken away. And I think that is all we've got time for right now. We'll see if we're still talking about this on Trump World next week.
That's it for Trump World. From me, Matt Fry in London.
And me, Anushka Rastana in Washington, DC. Bye.
Bye.